Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Ask the Experts program, Leading Through Volatility, Protecting the Corner Office. In today's environments, boards are facing an extraordinary mix of external and internal pressures, geopolitical instabilities, cyber threats, CEO burnout, and sudden leadership transitions. The question we'll explore today is, how do boards protect both the leader and the organization when volatility is the norm? So Heather, I'm going to start with you, and maybe you can, and just for the audience, I'm going to pull everybody in so we start everybody in the conversation, and then we'll do deeper dives with our experts. But first to you, Heather, what's the headline discussion today about the CEO and the C-suite considering the level of volatility that everyone's dealing with?
Yeah, sure. Certainly the world has changed, business has changed, particularly since COVID, for everyone from the CEO through the C-suite and beyond. As a result, their roles have changed. And particularly for those in public companies with investor dynamics also changing, their world is changing even more. But the overarching umbrella for everybody is really around the importance of adaptability and need to move very quickly, more so than they ever had to before. And if we think about sort of this generation of leaders, as they were growing up early in their careers, this idea of the world changing and technology changing every year didn't exist. So the need to have to adapt quickly and move quickly is just a muscle that most leaders have been building on the fly, mostly on their own over the last 5 years. And so as a result, what we're seeing in leadership today is what's needed to be an effective leader is just fundamentally different than it was 10 years ago, let's say. And humanity is really coming to the forefront in a way that it wasn't before. And there are a lot of implications for that, which I'll talk about later. But in terms of overarching theme, that's one of the big trends and implications we're seeing.
Great, thanks, Heather. Eric, if I turn to you, it wasn't too long ago that security was a question you dealt with when you were going to various parts of the world that were higher risk. Today, that risk is everywhere, including here in the US, and that changed pretty dramatically in December of 2024. Give us your perspective of how security concerns for the C-suite has shifted over the last few years.
Yeah, I do think there was a huge shift with Brian Thompson's murder back in December of 2024. I think a lot of applicable to this group, a lot of boards started talking with their C-suite team, their ELTs, to understand what security measures were in place. But forecasting into 2026, which I think that's kind of my overall approach to this panel is, we're going to see a lot of what we saw in 2025, the end of 2024 into 2025. I think we're going to see, more sophisticated. We've become more sophisticated. We're more globally interconnected. There is the rise and normalization of targeted activism and the use of digital exposure. These are all increasing risks that will continue to be next to kind of the geopolitical risks that have always been there, whether that was a coup in a certain country or some type of takeover or civil unrest in that country. There's also the natural disasters will always be there. Those are security and safety concerns that teams are going to have to consider and think about. The Family Wealth Report, they recently put out an article to just kind of really put some numbers behind this. 97% of global investors say it's important for companies to invest in the security of their executives. 7 out of 10 say that their senior executives represent a 30% value to the company. And to kind of because you mentioned Brian Thompson's murder, to kind of put that, kind of number to that, it's estimated $63 billion of UHC lost in the short aftermath behind Brian Thompson's murder. So I think just really we're going to see the threats, the risk increase based off this normalization that it's okay to take action, to be an activist, and have an axe to grind, and it's okay to put it out there. And unfortunately, I think we're going to see that across multiple sectors.
Great. Thanks, Eric. Nicole, it wasn't too long ago, and it's still important today, but strategy and hiring, firing the CEO was the board's top responsibilities. I've never remember a time where protecting the corner office came into the conversations. How are boards reacting to this higher level of volatility and all of the different threats out there?
Yes, Dennis, thank you for that. And it's great to be here with all of you. As you said, the board's role in supporting the CEO and really safeguarding the leadership continuity is really about protecting the enterprise's most valuable asset. And this is a lot of the work that we are doing today. That most critical asset is effective, stable leadership. We know that leaders come and go, but the institution remains. And we all know it really is the board's duty to see that that institution remains strong no matter who is in the corner office and no matter what challenges come their way. So we'll talk about this and some different strategies here, but we do see that today's boards are really expected to not just be the supervisors of management, but the true strategic partners in ensuring that leadership success and ensuring organizational resilience. So we'll talk about that. We've really seen that the intertwined challenges of both the CEO burnout, rapid turnover, the external threats that Eric was just mentioning, abrupt crises, all of these points, they really kind of point to one thing, that boards really have to be vigilant guardians of the corner office and supporting the CEO as a person and a leader. There are some different aspects to that today and some different strategies here that we'll talk about so that they can thrive and really deliver the long-term value that our organizations need. So it's planning for succession and having that be a living document, and ensuring that leadership continuity is really never in doubt. So it's a broader look at risk oversight, Dennis, and that definitely includes domains that are outside of the traditional purview. And I know we'll get into that a lot more today, but sound governance practices are really what will carry the organization through. And so looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So thanks everybody for kind of level setting us and peeling back a little bit the conversation that we want to have today. Heather, let's go to you for a deeper dive in terms of what you're seeing. Why don't you level set us with some data and some perspective about what's happening, what are some of the trends, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure. Happy to. So there's a lot of chatter about CEO tenures are way down and succession is way up. If we look over a long period of time, average CEO tenure is gradually declining, but it's not like it's fallen off a cliff. We may see significant changes from year to year due to episodic events, but fundamentally, while there's a decline, it's not dramatic. What has changed, however, are two things pretty significantly. First is historically, age was more of a predictor of CEO succession timing. Now it's much more about company performance, where you're seeing a much higher percent of CEO transitions in poorly performing companies than in high performing companies, or even sort of middle of the road, second, third quartile performing companies. The other big transition that we've seen is where successors are coming from. So historically, internal succession was represented about 80% of CEO successors, vast majority coming from inside the company. And while they still are, the mix this year, so far year to date, has dipped below 70%, which is the lowest it's been in almost 10 years. So a pretty significant shift from internal succession to external succession, which is a pretty strong signal that the board is looking for a greater degree of change than they think they can get probably inside the company. And so as part of this and in this environment that we're living in, Dennis asked me to provide some examples of some of the ways that we're helping boards and executive teams through all of this change. And I'd like to share 3 areas where we're seeing a lot of growth in terms of our work. One is around executive development. The second is actually around culture and culture evolution. And then the third is around the board being a real strategic asset. And I'll talk very briefly about each of those 3, but then I welcome questions from the group. First on executive development. So a long time ago, we used to think by the time someone became a CEO or a very senior executive, they were sort of a fully formed leader and didn't need a lot of development. And if they did, they knew how to develop themselves. That's language that I've heard a lot from clients. Neither of those things are true. And you may very well be familiar with research that we, of course, continue to learn and grow over time, and our brains continue to change. And adults want to continue to learn and develop, and we can literally teach an old dog new tricks. So our perspective on development is changing. And you may have heard the analogy of thinking about a leader as a container and putting lots of stuff. We're putting lots of stuff in the container of our leaders, and think of that as new knowledge, new experiences, new capabilities. We're shoving more and more stuff into our containers these days than ever before. That stuff we think of as horizontal development. So knowledge, basically, knowledge and experience. The work that executives need to really be able to thrive in today's environment and going forward, because the world is not going to get simpler, is more around vertical development. So how they see the world, how they think, how they generate new ideas, how they relate to people. And we think of these things as more about expanding the container and strengthening the container than just shoving more stuff into it. So as we work with CEOs and boards on development, we're really focused more on adaptability, of course, but also relatability and self-awareness is a big area of opportunity for most executives. The second area where we're seeing a lot of growth and a lot of interest from our clients is around evolution of culture. Because, of course, as the world changes, business strategy changes, you can't operate the same way and expect to get different results. So culture needs to change as part of that as well. But culture change is really, really hard, which is probably not a surprise to anyone. But it's hard because it requires being really choiceful about what you do and what you don't do, and making conscious decisions about stopping doing some stuff so that you can do other things. And it's those behaviors, norms, operating principles that the team engages in day after day that eventually build up to an evolution in culture. So the work that we've been doing is really around identifying and helping executives think about what is a culture that meets their business need, where they can discreetly and clearly identify the stop doing and start doing, and that enables them to evolve over time. And then the third piece is around using the board as a strategic asset. So we do a global CEO survey every year, and we just released this year's last week. And I think you'll get a link to that coming out of this session. But one of the questions that we ask CEOs is, who do you go to talk about the issues and challenges facing the company? By far, the number one response is their executive team. Second place is their peers at other companies. And then a distant third is the board. That's unfortunate. And some of that is proximity, that they're around their executive team every day. So that's explainable and makes sense. But why isn't the board higher? I would assert a couple of potential reasons, and I'd be interested in your perspectives as those of you serving on boards and in management roles as well. But my hypothesis, and in talking with CEOs, it's either they don't think the board can be that helpful, it doesn't feel safe, or they don't have access to the board, or they don't seem approachable. So as we think about helping boards be the greatest strategic asset they can be, we often help them think about kind of the who, the what, and the how of being an effective board. The who is, you have the right people around the table. The what is, are you talking about the right things at the right altitude? And the how is creating an environment of trust and openness to enable these kinds of conversations. So those are some of the ways that we're working with clients. And like I said, happy to elaborate if anyone would like to go deeper or on anything else.
Heather, there's a lot to unpack there, and maybe some questions will come in from the audience. But let me ask you a couple, and I don't know if I'll start with the easier one or the harder one first. You can be the judge of that. But talk about development of somebody who's about to be a first-time CEO. What does that look like? How do they do that? Calendars are most people's worst enemy. Time is the only thing there's a limited supply of. How does that fit in, and how do you coach CEOs who may think they know everything to kind of stretch a little bit? Because you use the term, which is the term of art that I keep hearing about, this new notion of adaptability because of the volatility and things coming from all sorts of directions. So peel that back a little bit for us.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things in there. The first and most fundamental thing I'd say is the first time someone is a CEO is the first time they're a CEO. Everyone goes through it. One of the other questions we ask CEOs actually in our survey is how prepared they were. And universally, a vast majority say they were not prepared to take the role in their first CEO role. So just knowing that and having the data to say it's not a weakness to say you need to learn and grow and develop, it's a different job. It's actually okay, you're in good company. So there's sort of nothing to hide there. From a timing perspective, there's a very, very short window leading up to the appointment of CEO and then being in the seat that someone has to get themselves ready and to demonstrate positive momentum. It is a narrow window. The day-to-day business will always be there, and there's a whole executive team and their direct reports who can do the doing work. The self work, the CEO has to do themselves. No one else can do that for them. So I would say, in terms of carving time out of a busy calendar, there's nothing more important than helping that person get ready for the job because the rest of the organization and their shareholders need them to be at their best for everyone to be successful. And then the third piece, remind me. Adaptability.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you, adaptability. So historically, we used to think about, do you know your business really well? Have you had the experiences? Do you have technical expertise? Do you know the key levers to drive the P&L? And like, frankly, that stuff is being commoditized faster and faster. Knowledge is not that valuable anymore. And honestly, it's very copyable. The stuff that's harder is, can you adapt? Can you sort of see what's coming before it gets there? Can you pivot? Can you learn new skills? Can you engage your team in a new vision? Those personal things and kind of the elements of how we think and work and how we create are unique and cannot be commoditized. And those are often the things that are overlooked when we look at CEO succession. We typically are so focused on, do they have the right experiences, that we forget to overlook the learning, agility, adaptability, and things that will help them continue to grow in the future.
Heather, the paper that Egon Zehnder recently released that you shared with us the other day, it talked about a key requirement of today's CEO is not only the things that you just talked about, but helping their team manage and adapt in that same day-to-day environment. How are you seeing them doing that? How do you stretch that out so the whole organization doesn't feel overwhelmed by headlines and pressures, whatever they may be, whether it's a war here, a war there, tariffs here, tariffs there, cybersecurity incidents, economic conditions, all of the things that are flying at people day in and day out?
Yeah, yeah. It's difficult. I mean, all executives live in a difficult world right now and are faced with conflicting polarities. So, on the one hand, set a long-term vision and inspire your team to continue to follow that North Star. On the other hand, you better not miss a quarterly number. On the one hand, be human and bring your full authentic self to work. But on the other hand, be scripted because everything you say and post and write is public. So you have to be careful in a way that executives didn't have to be before. And that's part of the kind of the humanness and embracing the humanness in our leaders and giving them a space to truly be themselves, but at the same time recognizing that there are sort of practical guardrails around that. So how, as a board, how you all can help are in a couple of ways. One is be in a safe space. And we like to think about the boardroom as being a safe space, but not a soft space. So safe in that you can have open conversations, you can challenge each other, you can be candid about the challenges facing ahead and the risks without the executive team feeling like they're under the microscope or there's going to be retribution down the road. But that doesn't mean it needs to be a soft space because, of course, you're still accountable for representing shareholders and holding management accountable. So, kind of creating that balance is a really important role that the board can play. Another important role is on development planning. So, interestingly, and we've seen this over time with pretty much every company in every sector all around the world, there's an inverse relationship between someone's seniority and the quality and frequency of feedback they receive. So the more senior you get, typically the less feedback you get, and actually the less helpful it is because it tends to be more about the what. So did you hit your number? And less about the how. And like your executives know if they miss their number for the quarter, they don't need you to come and tell them that, but they do need to hear your team thinks you're micromanaging, or you're not connected with the front line, or the board would like you to consider taking more risks, or spending less time presenting to us in PowerPoint, hypothetically, and more time
Mhm.
actually in strategic conversations. And that's feedback that's actually helpful and valuable. The other piece of feedback that I would offer is the mix of feedback, the more senior someone gets, tends to skew more constructive and they get less and less positive reinforcement. And so, building into your communication cadences with your management teams about what is working and what's going well as what we could do better next time, the more you're able to do that frequently. For example, after every board meeting, what if your chair called the CEO and your audit chair called the CFO and your comp chair called the CHRO, just for like a friendly debrief? What went well and what didn't go well? And what if it was your job to just listen?
Great.
One of the reasons I would assert that CEOs are going to their peers before they're going to their boards for input and feedback on what's happening in the world and what challenges lay ahead is they have very few opportunities to just talk and be heard. They're being talked at all the time and asked for decisions all the time. And what a nice, safe space you can create by just sometimes being a good listener.
Heather, one of the things that you mentioned that I'll come back to for the last question for you before we move to Eric, and it's some of the themes here about, safe but not soft space, listening, engaging, positive reinforcement and constructive reinforcement. Yeah, if your CEO doesn't know that they missed the numbers, you better be on the succession planning side, not the reinforcing side. But talk about culture and how do you make that come alive, and how important is that in today's world where so much stuff is changing?
Yeah, it's incredibly important for a lot of reasons. And as I said before, you can't expect the company to change and perform differently if the culture doesn't change. And I've seen this, I do a lot of work in the consumer sector, and it's been a very turbulent last couple of years. And I've seen this with some of my clients where the leadership team gets together and says, we're going to change the culture, we're going to operate differently. and they put some operating principles down on paper and some cultural norms, and this is what we want to do and stand for. But if it doesn't trickle down to the organization and how things actually operate, nothing changes. So a very common example is we want to move more quickly. We want to be agile. We want to be more innovative, but they're not changing sort of the guts of the company and where the layers, where do decisions lie, what processes and approvals do we need, and how can you possibly expect to move faster if nothing that happens under the surface changes? So part of what's important, as I said before, is really making concrete decisions about what we're going to stop doing and what we're going to start doing instead that will drive that cultural change, because it is behaviors over time that create culture.
Great. Thanks, Heather. We'll come back to you, I'm sure, in the Q&A at the end. But let's shift to Eric. Take us down a couple more levels in terms of what you're doing today with CEOs and C-suites to keep them safe, and start with the physical side of it, because that's probably the new big change that the marketplace is dealing with.
It is, and I'll pick up where Heather left off as far as culture goes, right? Because I 100% agree that starts off at the top. So if the board and the C-suite have a culture where they are prioritizing safety, security, health, and welfare, and that trickles down throughout the entire organization, just from a productivity, because you got to hit those numbers, you got to make sure that your employees feel comfortable, that they're safe, they can come to work and thrive and be their best version of themselves, right? If they're worried about things like, you mentioned physical safety, if they're worried about aspects of physical security, such as like active shooter situations, because it's happening at least once a week. We're hearing whether it's a school shooting or a corporate shooting, it's a hostile termination. But I would say that is often overlooked by boards and by corporations. Some of it is within their control. Other aspects of it may not be, but the security teams and the leadership team working closely with the security teams needs to ensure that they are taking accountability and taking actions for which they do have oversight. Because maybe you don't, I brought up active shooter, maybe you don't own the building. So that kind of prevents you from implementing certain measures at the very lobby level, but you can still, enact some access control measures that will automatically locking doors when AI tools detect a weapon or detect gunshots. Worst case scenario, someone's inconvenienced because it's a false alarm. And you have to go through the process and procedures to unwind all the actions that we're taking. So someone is delayed. That's kind of the worst case scenario. But I think from an infrastructure, securing infrastructure, that's something that is definitely on the rise. It's at the forefront. Placing security measures, not just in the lobby, but also on the executive level floor, making sure I have certain clients that I have armed, plainclothes armed agents that are sitting, amongst the C-suites, right outside their offices, monitoring the cameras coming off of the elevator bay, so that if someone somehow gained access that they don't have access control to, but somehow got a badge and was able to gain access to that floor unannounced, they obviously don't belong there. There's a layered approach to security. And that's really kind of on the physical infrastructure corporate campus that we're having a lot of these conversations. We're talking about remote guarding of cameras. So setting up your global security operations center, or GSOC, where are all those feeds going into? It's not good enough that you're recording these events, because you got to be able to take action. You have to have active guarding of those camera systems, and then a response, measures that can be very responsive in those types of situations. So I would say that's kind of more like on the corporate campus. We're also exploring and discussing with, it's one of our core capabilities is homes, executive homes. And I know we'll get into kind of the digital cyber aspect of it, so I won't jump the gun there. But it doesn't stop at the corporate office as far as security goes. That's probably the most secure that those executives are, that corner office. So it's really when they're at home, when they're very vulnerable, and that information is out there as far as home addresses. And then when they're traveling, there were certain everybody we I think you got to throw out the playbook. There's high risk countries and there's low risk countries. Everything should be viewed as moderate to high risk. EU is a great example of that. EU is always considered very low risk. But now we're seeing fundamentalists, activism, and they're very violent crimes. We're seeing, it happens multiple times a year, whether it's in Germany or France, where we're seeing, a terrorist attack using a vehicle, where that vehicle goes into a crowd of, event goers, attendees, and have mass casualties. So I think we need to kind of shift the paradigm and throw out the old playbooks of, oh, they're just going to, Europe, no big deal. That I think that has changed as, I think there's increasing, and it'll continue in the 26, increased hostility towards Western brands. That should be, at the forefront of corporate leadership and their security teams. That should be an active conversation. You mentioned Brian Thompson. I'll go back to that real quick and just how things have kind of changed. I had conversations with multiple chief security officers for months and months and months. We went around and around we knew all the security measures that they needed to implement for their specific situation, whether it was executive travel through a executive protection program, or it was residential assessments of homes, or it was having asset security and cameras monitoring corporate campuses with access control. All those things, every chief security officer, for the most part, I would say in the conversations I'm having, they know what right looks like. However, they didn't have the budget to protect the corner office. So often, right, they're given this task it's insurmountable, meaning if something goes wrong, they're the first one that people are going to look at and go, "Why didn't you think of this?" And they're gonna throw their hands up in the air and they're gonna be like, "No, I absolutely did." The problem is I never had budget. So I think those conversations really evolved after December of 2024. Boards were really talking to their executive teams. Budgets were really getting discussed. There was a lot of numbers thrown out in media as far as who's spending what. I don't know if you remember that, but some were shocked at the amount that you see for some of the more public personas out there and what they spend on security. But they are the brand. And that's back to, again, Heather talked about that transition that is tough for a CEO to make is, hey, I'm a normal person. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, a son, a daughter, right? And it just so happens that I've now been elevated into this key position, but I'm a normal employee, just like all the rest of you. That's often, having been in a position like that, that's how you view yourself. However, that's really not the case as we know it, right? You are the brand. You're symbolizing the company. Should something happen to you, there is material consequences to that.
Hey, Eric, here's a question that came in that kind of fits into this conversation. It's probably less about the CEO, him or herself, but lots of companies go through, particularly where they are, depending upon where they are, disaster recovery. But what are companies doing, particularly at some of their higher profile retail sites, to prepare their employees for terrorist attacks? Whether it's an organized group or a couple people who have a different point of view?
Yeah, so I just got earlier today, getting ready for providing event security for a large venue. You would think the organization super non-controversial, However, in recent history, they've been targeted by some activism groups, as well as just opportunities. Their attendees are seen as possible sympathizers that would then participate in protests that would be going on right outside the venue. So to kind of the activists were looking at taking advantage of those attendees and energizing them in a negative way, and then really causing disruption that just doesn't help the overall event. So we have those conversations all the time. With that, we do things such as using data scraping of the open and dark web. We leverage, that's where I turn to Global Guardian's intelligence division. I really leverage their capabilities. But most importantly, everybody in this space, in the security firm space, or even in the corporate space, you have access. We all have access to the same information. It's all open source intelligence. And from there, it really matters what sets you apart from everybody else. So you can pay a subscription, and that subscription is going to pump out a bunch of information, tell you there's a threat, tell you there's a lot of chatter, tell you that there's people talking about doing a protest or targeting with violence, a storefront. And then from there, it's okay, so what? Do you have the ability to take action? Would be the first question. But also, having boots on the ground, having a team that is there to no kidding assess the situation of, is it really at the level of what the online chatter is, or is it higher or lower? Recent example too that is all over the news because the government shutdown is SNAP benefits. I never thought this would be thrown on my desk to problem to solve, but working with storefronts who have clients who use SNAP benefits, and now with the government shutdown, they aren't available. So now there's discussions of, hey, we're just going to go loot and we are going to damage property. We're just going to walk out of stores. We're going to cause chaos, vandalism. And, that's a huge safety and security concern for all of these corporations. So again, we're monitoring those situations. We're reporting. We're letting those security teams know what's going on. When it reaches a certain level, we have certain triggers that we therefore take action, meaning we will put plainclothes individuals out amongst the general population. And we can use some technical measures such as remote mobile camera systems to provide that layered defense away from not just the storefront lobby, but get it out as far as possible so we could have that early warning network.
We're going to turn to cyber in a minute, but give me an example of a project that you're working on with a particular company. Let's call it a plain vanilla company in middle America, no incredibly high profile, but what are you doing for them to protect their team, leverage this little scary scraping the dark web and feeding that back into an organization? But what's that look like? What's the interface with the company? Who are you working with? And how do companies kind of pull you guys in?
Yeah, the first step is having the conversation. It's, hey, look what I can find on the open web very easily, starting with Google, getting into LinkedIn, connecting other aspects of social media. All of a sudden, I have the home address of your CEO. And now as we saw this month, actually this week, recently, there was a shooting in North Carolina where a gentleman, his wife was fired from Walmart. That person went and shot up the home of the Walmart manager that fired his wife, and then shot up his vehicle. So not only are you that is the executive at risk, but now the family's at risk. But having that information out there, that digital information out there to know where to go. There's been huge leaks, and I think as Luigi Mangione, Brian Thompson's murder comes to trial, I think we're going to see more of this, where you'll see these websites pop up with all this information that is a combination of data brokers and leaks and everything else that come together and aggregated in one spot. And you can Google it right now, Luigi was right database, and you can go look at it, and you will see CEOs and C-suite members' names, their phone numbers, their email addresses. So imagine the harassment level of having an executive's phone number to then text them, threaten them. So those are some of the things from a digital standpoint you have to be aware of. Now, we have certain capabilities that will go above and beyond your standard subscription online that you can get to delete your data, your PII, off of the open web, as well as devalue your information on the deep and dark web. So to directly answer your question, Dennis, those are the capabilities we would have. Is step one is have the conversation, show that your executives are exposed, and action needs to be taken, because the breadcrumbs are laid. I can connect the dots to get from a digital targeting to a physical threat targeting on that person's well-being or their family members. And then once we have that conversation, then here are the capabilities we have. We can delete that information daily from the internet, so that when this nefarious actors are out there looking to deliberately target you, they're not coming up on the information required to do so. That's just one of the measures we have.
Great. Thanks for that, Eric. Now, let's spend a few minutes on cyber. We've just talked about the physical side of the world. Give us some headlines on cyber.
Yeah, so I see a lot of one thing that's often missed, I'll put it this way, or overlooked, is cybersecurity. Everybody wants to focus on the physical piece of it. Hey, we're going to have armed close protection officers with an armed driver, and you can see that. It's tangible. But back to the number one, you need to remove any executive leaderships, board members, PII, so that they're not targeted. Their home addresses aren't readily available. If their home was ever for sale on Zillow, the floor plans and layout of that home are not available for someone to pre-plan, and then therefore be more effective. So that's number one. The number two that is really overlooked is working from a home office or from home, where what's the safety measures? And this is something that, for my high net worth family members too, I tell them is you are a prime target for any type of extortion case if you do not secure your home internet. And from a corporate standpoint, there's the leakage or stealing of intellectual property. That is also an aspect of this. But there could be, one day, one of your executives is going to receive a text message because the nefarious actor got that off of Luigi Was Right database, then texted your CEO and is going to say, I have access to your home internet. I have access to your iPad's camera. I have compromising photos of you. If you don't take these following actions, this is what I'm going to expose. So we have the ability to come in and protect against that by protecting and hardening those networks, and then monitoring those networks for any type of outside digital threat that's trying to penetrate, put ransomware on any systems. We can protect end devices. And then should you receive one of these text messages, we can prove they're false because we can remote into all your end devices, do a remote scanning, and then, give you the confirmation and, the confidence that there's nothing malicious on your phone, as an example. Therefore, this is just some random act. They targeted you because, you didn't ask us to delete your digital data. So they had that information and they made it feel real.
And is that extending? You talked about the home security around, internet traffic and all that stuff, but is it the spouse, the kids, the aunts, the uncles,
Yeah,
the
this is the
brother-in-law that you
conversation.
wish you didn't have, maybe?
Yeah, this is the conversation Heather needs to have. I recommend, and I'll help out when you're meeting with that brand new CEO. It's not just that CEO's life who's changed, right? That just changed. It's the entire family because the family's the soft target. They expect, at some level, the CEO is going to have some type of security, but the kids are going to be posting things on social media about their school, which then exposes them, like, hey, we know what school they go to now. We know based on the house what's the most probable route that mom is going to take to do school drop off. And because, we're creatures of habit, we don't change our pattern of life. We drive the same route every day at the same time. You now make yourself available to be a target, whether that's a targeting right then and there or a kidnapping hostage type situation. Again, because someone is not happy because you're in the sector of healthcare, financial, cryptocurrency. Maybe I was irresponsible and I ran up all my credit cards and I blame you for that. Not me, but I blame you. And I'm going to take it out on your family because they're the soft target. So educating the family members is extremely important. I can put SEAL Team 6 on any CEO. That's great. But, we all know here because we have families. Like, I'm probably less concerned about my safety than I am about my wife and children. So just educating them and training them on some very basic digital social media hygiene, and just things to consider, basic stuff. You would be surprised. But I would say that's a key aspect of what we provide in training C-suite members.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. Nicole, you've been incredibly patient waiting for this conversation to get all the way to you in Dallas. And so let me ask you to peel back where the board's been kind of thinking about and how they're fitting into this conversation and helping, protect the corner office, as we said at the beginning.
Absolutely, Dennis, and really thoughtful comments by Eric and Heather. And Eric, thank goodness your firm is in the business that you are. These are it's a whole new day. So Dennis, I'll probably just pivot there and kind of tie into what Eric was just sharing. And as you all know, just the volatility, the activist pressures, the kind of this always on scrutiny. Really, the CEOs, they almost have less time to prove themselves, and they face a higher risk of early exit. And so boards, from the board perspective, really need to treat CEO longevity and health as a critical asset to protect. And so the health and the well-being side is something that is a newer element that we have seen that we have certainly been doing a lot of work on. But CEO well-being is a material governance issue that really needs to be addressed, and very thoughtfully from the board's standpoint. The board can no longer really assume the CEO will tough it out unaided, as maybe some of the thinking of the past, but directors really need to be proactive in supporting just the human side behind the CEO to ensure an environment that thrives. So we really see 4 key practices where boards are really leveraging strategies to enhance the CEO's staying power, their well-being, and incorporating that into their oversight duty. The first, and it will tie into some of the thoughts that Heather shared, is building a high trust relationship. And that is just disciplined and intentional efforts to cultivate trust between the board and the CEO. And so I'll just give a couple of specific examples. Number one is private executive sessions between the directors and the CEO without a formal agenda that really can kind of serve as a bit of a pressure release valve, and really being able to just kind of share, have a sounding board opportunity. Individual directors serving as coaches or confidants to the CEO so that they are not truly alone at the top, and the CEO feels heard and that the board has their back, mitigates a lot of the stresses as well. And we've seen this across the board. So cultivating a culture where the CEO is comfortable just admitting pressures, asking for help rather than feeling guarded all the time is a very good practice today. The second thing is prioritizing the CEO well-being and placing that as a governance matter that we may not have looked at it that way in the past. But traditionally, I think, as has been said, boards are focused on the CEO performance metrics as the top priority, and it is very important. But to get to that, we've got to look at the workload, the health, and the overall work-life balance. So prioritizing that overall well-being is very critical, and that's monitoring the early warning signs, for burnout, for fatigue. If you see, pardon me, noticeable changes in behavior, in decision-making, in health, the energy of the CEO. So the board has really got to be proactive. And some boards now explicitly are discussing the CEO's stress level and resilience as part of the executive session to really keep a finger on the pulse there. We've also seen in the CEO well-being category our clients that are incorporating the executive care programs, just wellness exams with executive health centers that really provide a holistic view and a plan for the CEO and frankly for their leaders as well. If that's executive physicals, it's really designed overall to safeguard the company's most critical assets, the leadership team. So we also see just other things, ensuring the CEO is taking regular vacations, delegating more, that they're utilizing an executive coach that is a confidential resource if needed, and just kind of arranging for that outside outlet is very helpful. So there are two other points I'll share here. The third is just setting realistic expectations and support. Boards really, you want to realign on a reasonable time frame for achieving strategic goals, and that also is very helpful in managing the pressure. So if the board can proactively offer support, if it's additional resources, if it is adjustments to the strategy, if it is extending timelines to the extent that is possible, rather than simply increasing the demands. If there is that kind of open dialogue, that is extremely helpful. Oftentimes, we also see the board just helping with the public-facing load that can kind of reduce some of that where it is the CEO only that is the public-facing position, and that also reinforces the team approach and kind of shares some of that burden. And the fourth thing that we are seeing is just encouraging succession bench development. And you might think of that as that might not reduce the stress if you're kind of thinking about the succession process, but boards really need to urge the CEOs to delegate and to develop talent and to be a part of that succession planning. Really critical. And so those are some of the things we're seeing, Dennis, but at the end of the day, boards really should treat the CEO longevity and health as a very critical asset that they are looking to protect.
Thanks, Nicole. A couple questions sprung to mind as you were kind of walking us through that list of items. Where does this happen, right? Board agendas are packed, committees happen the day before, people fly in, they fly out. Is this happening in the board meeting? Is it happening outside? What's the process to make this really stand up and be sustainable in a meaningful way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think truly where we are seeing it most frequently is that there are extended meetings or ensuring that there's time kind of before, the night before, the day before the board meetings, so that there is time for more of the informal conversation. The well-being plan, though, that is something that is being incorporated into an overall documentation related to the resilience plan. So both the operation and financial resilience plan, this is being incorporated there.
And how do you balance privacy? If, a wellness plan and health plan, the privacy of the executive, if he or she doesn't want somebody to know something that they have that for them is very personal, but obviously it, depending upon the severity of it, could have that impact on the tenure in the corner office, if you will.
And I think it's kind of case by case, but in general, I think by and large, what we have seen is that there is very open dialogue between the CEO and the board. We've seen really the situations where the CEO is very welcoming of kind of having that partnership, and that there is a thoughtful approach to balancing the well-being and the responsibilities, and it's also kind of a long-term plan. You're looking at succession planning. You're looking at ensuring that there is an ongoing kind of living process for updating that succession plan, and that's a regular part of the board agenda as well. So it becomes more of a holistic approach to really protect the corner office. It's the most important asset that you have in the company, and it's something to stay engaged in the planning process throughout the year. But those are some of the ways that we see it really being brought to bear.
Great, thanks. Nicole, Heather mentioned a couple things as she kind of framed out her deep dive, and one of them that I didn't peel back a little bit because I thought it was going to fit in here nicely. And Heather talked about the board as a strategic asset, but and generalizations are always wrong, so I'll apologize first for my generalization. But as Heather said, the CEO isn't really going to the board as often as maybe the board thinks they deserve to be, right? At first, it's the executive team, and it's fair. They're there day in and day out. They're dealing with the same issues, so it's easy to get some perspective from them. The other bucket is that CEO's personal network, presumably of other people going through similar things, whether it was at another company that they're serving as a mentor or a coach or all those kinds of things. And there's all sorts of studies. The board has a more positive view of their capabilities than the C-suite and the CEO and his or her team, and that shows up in a bunch of different reports. How do you blend those facts into dynamics where the board has to be more engaged with the CEO and has to be bringing value and has to be bringing it day in and day out and has to be aware of their limitations because they got part-time jobs, right? A lead director of a Fortune 50 public company said to me, I have a full-time, part-time job. And what he meant by that was, I can never let the executive team think I'm too busy to talk to them about anything. Because the minute I do that, they'll stop talking to me and reaching out to me. But he recognizes the reality is he's not going to the office day in and day out. He's got other things that, and it was a he in this case, but how do you blend those dynamics of not a full-time gig, understanding the industry, understanding the company, understanding the environment, but it's a different level of understanding, and how do you pull those things together so you can be the board that needs to be helping oversee the corner office and protecting the corner office?
Absolutely, Dennis. I think it is just trying to ensure that you don't have a blind spot there related to the CEO, the corner office, and potential turnover there. I think the turnover is high at the CEO level, and at the same time, some of the studies that we have leveraged is that nearly 75% of directors believe that the risk of a sudden CEO exit at their own company was very low. So it's just sometimes we can tend to be more comfortable or overconfident. And we, in today's environment, especially in light of all the things that Eric just shared with us, there are a lot of unplanned departures. There are a lot of unplanned situations that you really have got to just be very closely connected to be able to stay ahead of. And I'll just kind of pivot that into some of the things that we are seeing. That connectivity a lot of times is coming through the board's role and best practices for the succession planning. And I know that's something really critical for all of us that are in the boardroom. And Dennis, you started us out with CEO succession, and that used to be, one of the primary roles. But if we look at just that strategic process, and it's something that we see as a continuous, just ongoing living process today. It's not really a one-time event that we have seen in the past. So we see that probably 3 to 4 major areas that we see covered in that succession oversight. Embedding the succession into the regular board agenda. So rather than not having that as a topic, at times it can be just something that's not as comfortable when you have a successful CEO run, but even more important, that it should just become a normalized process, that the succession planning discussion should be regularly embedded into the board agenda, and that it's reviewed at least on an annual basis, if not at every one of the board meetings, in some form or fashion, and documented in a CEO succession planning document. So we've seen a lot of and really CEOs themselves becoming even more engaged in the planning and prioritizing that as well. So just ensure that your board, your institution has an annual succession planning review and meeting, and that documentation and the pipeline of those successors as well. The second area that we have seen is really addressing the long-term and the emergency succession. In light of today's environment, that really is 2 key areas that you've got to have documented and well thought out. The planned succession, and that's probably more the traditional area with CEO retirement, or maybe they're at the end of their contract in a few years, and you want to groom that next successor. But the board also should have that unplanned succession. If it's sudden resignation, if it's illness, if it's removal, or some of the other scenarios we've talked about today. So we found that nearly half of the boards do not forecast the actual risk of turnover, even as they update those plans. So that's something that boards should really explicitly discuss. All of the what if scenarios, and ensure that a thoughtful approach is really taken there. Because if the CEO is, for whatever reason, taken out of their role unexpectedly, there are all sorts of risks, reputationally, competitors trying to poach on certain of the executives and the leadership team, and customers, and you just really want to try to manage as much as you can, have your designated interim successor. Oftentimes that's the COO or the CFO or even the lead independent director. But that's really a wise move to have that designation and to have that documentation. So in your plan, ensure that emergency CEO replacement protocol is documented and well thought through, so that you can respond immediately with those liaison duties. And the final area, I would say, in the succession process is just developing that internal talent and options. So you really want a situation where there are multiple internal CEO candidates over a period of time. And that's a critical role that the board is playing. You want to have at least one that is a ready successor today, and then a couple of near ready prospects. So working closely with the human resources team and having their involvement, staying engaged, really defining the criteria, not only for what will fit you today, but really where you're going with the strategy and what will it need to be? What are the attributes you're looking for 3 years from now? And ensuring that you've got that bench strength. And if the CEO needs to delegate more to try to help develop their skills and capabilities over the coming years, that is tied into that plan as well. And probably that ties into just burnout prevention for the CEO as well, in trying to delegate and allocate out those responsibilities. So just ideal to start planning for a new CEO almost the day that the CEO takes that corner office, Dennis, and ensuring that there are many years to kind of plan that out and have both your emergency and then your regular ongoing succession process, and kind of have that forward-looking approach to it.
Great, thanks, Nicole. That was lots of great information. The whole session so far has been lots of great information. Heather, I consciously didn't ask you about that third point. The board is a strategic asset, because I thought it would fit in nicely after Nicole kind of set up her perspective. But care to react and share some perspective from where you sit and where you engage?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And an area that I think we haven't covered, but that I think Nicole's touched on and I've touched on, is this area that the role the board can play in readying their leaders for what's next, but more broadly, development in general. And so I would say for all of you, one of the ways you can really continue to add a lot of value for your companies and for the boards that you serve on is making sure that your CEO and everyone on the executive team is getting real feedback every year that includes 360 input from peers, direct reports, as well as the board, and that it's delivered with candor and care, and that they have a development plan, and that their development plan includes things that they are excited about and want to learn and are motivated to work on, even if you don't think they'll ever get promoted again, even if it's the very end of their career and you think that they may be retiring next year. You can still contribute to them and help them think about what may be next in their life, and that will help feed their energy, their resilience, and make them help for them bring their best selves to work.
Great, thanks for that. We have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to go back to each of you. And Eric, I'm going to start with you first. Give a takeaway to this group about what they ought to think about later this afternoon or tomorrow and react to or act on.
Yeah, I would just think about what are the conversations as board members that you're going to have with your executives, right? I would say to establish that trust. We talked, Heather brought it up, kind of a little bit of a disconnect at times. So how do you get there? And that, to me, that I've always seen incredibly valuable is laying the foundation of trust, showing that you care about them. Part of that caring is asking the right questions. Hey, what are we doing for you? Is it for security, safety, for not just you, but for everybody in this company? Do you feel it's at the appropriate level? What are we doing when, your associates and your executives travel overseas? Or do we have, anyone that can react really quickly in country that can help you outside of just a regional team member who, may or may not answer the phone when something happens? So I think just having those conversations that are very candid and transparent and really are based on trust of, hey, we really do care about you, your family, and their health and welfare. And I think that just having that approach would be the one of the key takeaways that I would offer up, because I think that would open the door to a wider discussion of you know what? I don't feel comfortable when I travel and my family is left behind at home and I'm not there in the evening. Maybe we can do some things to help out by putting cameras on the house and remotely guarding them during periods of darkness, so forth. These are just some of the examples that, I would kind of put out there to make them feel a little bit more comfortable, and then show your value proposition of what you're bringing as a board member. And they go, you know what, I think that person does care about me. It's not just always about my numbers, even though the numbers matter.
Heather, let me turn to you, ask the same question. What's the one action you'd like board members listening to this to take this afternoon or tomorrow?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think to me, a big takeaway is that great leadership just fundamentally looks different today than it did 10 years ago. And as knowledge and experience will continue to be increasingly commoditized, as you're thinking about leadership, whether it's succession planning or developing your current leaders, I would encourage you all to be thinking about the qualities of adaptability, self-awareness, and relatability as you're helping your leaders continue to grow, evolve, and get ready for the next generation.
Great, thanks for that. And Nicole, same question to you.
Yes. I think a lot of this is resilience through preparation. The common thread, I think, in all of these practices is just the preparation, the foresight, dedicating the time to it so that you are ahead. We know boards can't predict every crisis, but preparing for the possibility and incorporating that into your agenda year round is something that really is a best practice, and it really is necessary in today's environment, so that in doing this, when something does happen or you do have a sudden CEO departure, the response is for your company is swift, it's calm, it's effective, and you're really following a playbook rather than acting in an ad hoc manner. So that really preserves the business continuity and the resilience of the company overall.
Heather, Eric, Nicole, thanks for joining us today. Great conversation. Learned a lot. Hopefully put a bunch of that in use this afternoon or tomorrow. Thanks.